In Kate Chopin's novella, the main character, Edna, experiences both literal and figurative awakenings on her way to self-realization. Hers is the story of a woman trying to figure out her place in a society that has a strict set of expectations connected to womanhood. Expectations Edna cannot and does not want to meet. Considered scandalous at the time of its publication, and even called vulgar, yet very mild by today's standards, The Awakening gives one tale of the female experience, and both the good and the bad, that can accompany the search for self after waking up.
Our first author for this week, Kate Chopin, was born in St. Louis, Missouri in 1851 to a French Creole mother and an Irish-American father. Unfortunately, when she was very young, Kate Chopin's father was in a horrific train accident and died, leaving her to be raised by her widowed great-grandmother, her widowed grandmother, and her recently widowed mother. So she had a lot of maternal influence growing up, but not a lot of paternal influence. Kate Chopin attended a Catholic girls' school for most of her education, and at the age of 18, she married Oscar Chopin in 1870. He was 25, so a few years older than her, and she left her home of St. Louis, Missouri, to go with Oscar to New Orleans. And by all accounts, it was a very happy marriage. Oscar was very lenient as a husband in many ways, giving Chopin a degree of freedom that many women did not experience during the time. So Chopin enjoyed quite a degree of independence in her marriage, and again, by all accounts, they had a very happy and loving marriage. Chopin had 6 children with Oscar before the age of 30, but in 1880, Oscar's businesses failed as a result of poor cotton crops, and he moved his family to Cloyderville in Natchitoches Parish, Louisiana, where he ran a general store and several small plantations. Sadly, though, Oscar died in 1882 of swamp fever. Kate ran his businesses for a few years, but moved back to St. Louis to be closer to her mother with the children. A few years after that, though, Chopin's mother died, leaving her without any family support, and so in 1887 she began writing as a means to support her family. And Kate's familiarity with the Creole Society of New Orleans and the Acadian or Cajun Society of Natchitoches Parish really influenced her writing and found its way into her short stories and novels. The Cajun people trace their French heritage through Acadia, which was a French settlement in Canada, and they spoke a sort of 17th century version of French, so kind of more of a historic version of the language, which sort of set them apart from the Creoles. And the Creoles, who we see written about in The Awakening, were mostly wealthy or very well-off descendants of the French, who came to America, but really held on to their French culture and language because they believed that it was superior to American culture and language. They were very suspicious of outsiders, especially those who came to New Orleans from other parts of the United States. And we see this in The Awakening because Edna is from Kentucky and kind of becomes part of this Creole society through marriage and doesn't quite fit in with the people in her community. Kate Chopin, though, was Creole on her mother's side, and her husband Oscar had also come from a Creole family. And so Chopin's descriptions of these cultures and areas really made her considered a local color or regionalist author during her lifetime, and that's usually kind of the main genre associated with her work even today. And Chopin's first short stories were very popular. She earned a decent living from them. But as she began to write these kind of more emboldened women characters who kind of went against the status quo to greater degrees and kind of transgressed those rules of society a bit more, like we see in The Awakening, she began to lose popularity. When The Awakening was first published, it was considered a filthy and vulgar novel by many critics. People thought it was way too scandalous and kind of considered it a piece of pornographic literature in some cases, so it was very poorly received, which hurt Chopin deeply. And she went on to not write very much for the rest of her life until she died in 1904 of a brain hemorrhage. After that, The Awakening kind of disappeared from the field of American literature until Kenneth Ebel rediscovered it in 1956, and then feminist scholars and other literary scholars sort of renewed their focus and got it included in the American canon. The regionalist or local color movement really started after the Civil War, and in some ways was a response to the Civil War. Just like we saw with the modernist movement being a response to World War I, the Civil War was a dramatic shakeup in American history. And after that war was over, national interests really won out over regional or statewide interests. So we saw an interest in preserving the culture, the spirit, the essence of these different regions of the United States. And that movement really sought to accurately portray the way of life of a culture and region, often using dialogue or vernacular, which is the speech of the everyday people. We see this in The Awakening when Chopin frequently uses French phrases to kind of capture that actual language in the way that the Creole society would use French and English to really accurately portray that people. And regionalist texts really emphasize the unique points of a region. So again, things like dialect, customs, traditions, topography, geography, history, characters, whether they're real or fake. Oftentimes we see that there are characters who have a certain attitude to the region and its traditions. So they may be an insider character, or like in The Awakening, they may be an outsider character to kind of give us a different viewpoint of those regions and the cultures associated with them. And regionalism often overlaps with realism, which sought to really accurately portray the world as it actually is, rather than kind of being nostalgic and idealized like we would see in Romanticism. So while The Awakening is a regionalist novel, it does employ facets of realism when it really kind of is trying to portray the world as it actually is, but also Romanticism, because we get a lot of idealized, kind of fantastical, emotional descriptions of the area, especially when we're on Grand Isle. The Awakening can also be considered a fin du siècle piece of literature, which refers to literature and art written at the turn of the century as we were moving from the 1800s into the 1900s, or the 19th century into the 20th century. And this transition between the centuries was really characterized by a sense that the old times were ending, giving way to an uncertain and rapidly changing future. Many people viewed this with excitement, but an equally large number viewed this with fear. During the fin du siècle transition, we really saw a move away from the strict rules and morals of Victorian society that also characterized Victorian literature and art in many cases. We saw a rise in naturalism, which is another literary movement that is dealt with somewhat in The Awakening, that portrays human fate as determined by science and the environment or nature. It was kind of influenced by the works of Charles Darwin and sort of took a very deterministic and more kind of pessimistic view of human fate and human free will. And the new woman and kind of what it meant to be a woman in the new century was also another focus, in addition to naturalism, in this movement. And we can see a lot of the influences of the fin du siècle movement in The Awakening, especially in the way it explores womanhood, motherhood, traditional gender roles, and female desire and the body.